We're joined by Real Clear Politics reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns and Josh Holmes, who is the former chief of staff to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Caitlin will be with you in just a moment. Josh, I want to start with you. There's so much outrage over Trump's divisive comments. Is this what the frontrunner wanted?
Well, I've said for months that the day that Donald Trump's campaign ceases to be provocative, it ceases to exist. And, he's running out of real estate, so I guess this is where you head. But this is truly outrageous. It's completely ridiculous. There's nothing conservative. There's nothing Republican about religious intolerance. It's a central tenet to the founding of our republic. And frankly, I think all of the other candidates were right to jump ugly immediately on Donald Trump and his comments.
Caitlin, what are your thoughts on what you heard?
Well, I do think that it is interesting that we've seen the Republican candidates really galvanize against him, but I don't think this is going to affect his standing with his supporters, and I'm not sure we're going to see a reaction in the polls. We've seen this play out time and time again, although these, I think, are the most controversial of controversial statements that he's made. But he is, as he says, always tapping into that anxiety and that frustration that his supporters feel that this administration is not reacting the way that they think it should be. So while I do think that Republicans are really concerned about this kind of conversation, I don't think it's going to move his numbers. We'll see, but if history is any guide, we kind of know the answer.
Josh, before his statement came out, one poll came out showing that Ted Cruz was taking the lead in Iowa. This isn't the first time, as Caitlin mentioned, that he has made headline-grabbing, controversial statements when his lead appears in jeopardy. Is there a connection, do you think?
Sure. I think Donald Trump will do almost anything he can do to get attention back to himself and his campaign. He's a master showman. He's done it inside and outside of politics for his entire career. And so I think that's definitely a part of it. His bigger problem, however, is that we're closely approaching the final piece of this campaign before voters start actually casting ballots. And that is marked by a much more pragmatic view of voters of who can actually do the job of President of the United States. And frankly, if you look at comments like the ones he made yesterday, I think almost everybody has to question his capability for the job.
Josh, I also wanted to ask you about the other candidates' reaction. When Donald Trump does this sort of thing, he tends to control the topic of conversation. And you found a lot of candidates coming out pretty harshly. Jeb Bush saying that he's become unhinged. Lindsey Graham calling his comments downright dangerous. But then I thought about Ben Carson, who was a little more lukewarm in his reaction, saying, look, everyone who visits this country should be monitored. You shouldn't target a specific group. And Ted Cruz, of course, who sort of turned it into a policy comment, and he talked about immigrants from Syria and that this wasn't his policy. I'm wondering if the other candidates, if there's a way for them to benefit, and if what you think about how the candidates reacted to his statement.
Yeah, for the most part, I think everybody did the right thing. You're right. There was some tepid pieces of it from some of the candidates, and I think that's just completely ridiculous. If you can't risk offending people who are in favor of internment camps and mass deportations and fundamental abridgments to the First Amendment to the Constitution, then you've got a real problem. And some of the candidates do have that problem. I think the bigger issue with the candidates is that people would love to be talking about what almost everybody saw as an inadequate approach of the President of the United States over the weekend in his speech and trying to calm Americans about this clear terrorism threat that we have. There are candidates like Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, Chris Christie, and others who've got a lot to say about that kind of thing, and they can't now. They're talking about whether or not it's appropriate to have all Muslims unbelievably barred from coming into the country, and that's, I think, a real problem for the rest of the field.
Caitlin, you just wrote an article about this. Speaking of the Democrats, they're welcoming these harsh comments. Is this helping them?
Well, it certainly is giving them a leg up at this point, because they're able, what they want to do is paint the Republican Party with a broad brush. And the fact that Donald Trump, every day pretty much, we have some kind of controversy coming from his campaign, and Democrats are really seizing on that to paint the other candidates in this kind of light. And it remains to be seen whether, the eventual nominee, whoever it is, and Democrats do acknowledge acknowledge they don't necessarily think it's going to be Trump, but whoever the nominee is will be faced with kind of a reset, if you will, on this campaign, and that's really difficult at this point to do. And as Josh mentioned, we are just 2 months away from voting, and so we'll see kind of what happens in Iowa and New Hampshire. But from what we've seen so far, Donald Trump is still and continues to be the front runner of the party at this point.
And Josh, before we let you go, so looking at the big picture, what's at stake for the GOP with only 2 months to go before these important caucuses and primaries?
Well, I don't think anybody should overreact and act as if Trump is the nominee today. There's a lot that needs to be litigated here in this next 2 months. A lot of the candidates have a lot to say about it, and I think the party at large has got a lot of really good choices before them on who's going to be the standard bearer as we go into the spring and ultimately into the general election. But one piece that really people shouldn't forget is the other question in all of these polls is who matches up well with Hillary Clinton. Increasingly, you see guys like Donald Trump who are getting blown out by Hillary Clinton, even though she's underwater by 10 points. So, that's going to be another thing that voters look at before they vote.
Who do you think would match up next to Hillary Clinton right now after Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, if you look at the polls, they indicate that a candidate like Marco Rubio does really, really well against Hillary Clinton. He bests her in almost every head-to-head matchup. But there are a lot of other candidates that do well, too. And so I think that Republicans have a bunch of good choices. Donald Trump is not one of them.
All right. Caitlin, Huey-Burns, and Josh Holmes in D.C., thank you both.
Thank you.